Since as early as Gemini 4 in June of 1965, NASA had been hard at work to master the techniques needed for an astronaut to perform outside a spacecraft. On June 3, 1965, Gemini 4 astronaut Ed White opened his hatch door and floated out into the vacuum of space, becoming the first American to perform an EVA. By the time White returned to the spacecraft and closed the hatch 23 minutes later, he had made the exercise look easy. America's next attempt at EVA came on June 5, 1966, during the flight of Gemini 9. The EVA called for mission pilot Gene Cernan to exit the spacecraft and move to its rear, where he would strap himself into the Astronaut Maneuvering Unit. The Astronaut Maneuvering Unit, or AMU, was a rocket pack of sorts, which would allow a spacewalking astronaut to maneuver free of the spacecraft. At 10:19 Eastern Standard Time on June 5, 1966, astronaut Gene Cernan left the confines of a spacecraft, becoming the second American to walk in space. Soon, Cernan began making his way toward the rear of the spacecraft to reach the awaiting AMU. Cernan quickly discovered that without the benefit of handholds and footholds, his effort to move around in a gravity-free environment was a struggle. Cernan's pulse rate soon had soared to 195 beats per minute. And to make matters worse, Gemini 9 had now moved into nighttime, and Cernan's faceplate had fogged up as he exerted himself maintaining control. The EVA was cut short over concerns for Cernan's safety, and following another struggle, he safely returned to the spacecraft. Then, in July of 1966, during the flight of Gemini 10, astronaut Michael Collins became the first person to perform 2 EVAs during a single mission. The first of those was a stand-up EVA, during which Collins opened the hatch and simply stood up in order to take photographs without actually leaving the spacecraft. 48 hours and 41 minutes into the flight of Gemini 10, Collins again opened the hatch, this time exiting the spacecraft and into the void of space. Like Cernan before him, Collins encountered great difficulty controlling his motion, and the EVA was cut short after only 39 minutes. Astronaut Richard Gordon was the next American to try his hand at EVA, this time during the flight of Gemini 11. Unfortunately, Gordon didn't fare much better.
How you doing? Tired, Pete. All right, just rest.
He had lost sight in his right eye from sweat, and rather than risk losing sight in the other, the EVA was cut short after 44 minutes. If America was to achieve the goal of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth, mastery of EVA was essential. Gemini 12 marked the final time NASA would be able to experiment with EVA before the Apollo program, and for the first time, underwater simulation of EVA was incorporated into training for an actual spacewalk. The experience of underwater training gave the effect of working in zero gravity. Mission pilot Buzz Aldrin was suited up and weighted down with 60 pounds of lead before entering a pool to perform tasks similar to those he would perform in space. Aldrin was positioned at a submerged Agena workstation where he attached handholds, used a torque wrench, and made electrical connections. On September 27, 1966, NASA scrapped plans for Aldrin to deploy the Astronaut Maneuvering Unit, preferring instead to focus more attention on developing EVA expertise. Then, nearly 1 month before the launch of Gemini 12, NASA announced an updated plan for the expected EVAs. The first EVA was planned for a 2-hour and 15-minute period, during which Aldrin would open the hatch, stand up, and conduct a series of day and night photographic experiments. Then, during a second EVA planned for 1 hour and 45 minutes, Aldrin was scheduled to hook up the Agena tether to the spacecraft and carry out basic work tasks like those practiced during underwater training. The first of 3 scheduled EVAs took place following the first extended rest period of the mission. Buzz Aldrin donned his spacesuit, and 19.5 hours after liftoff, he opened the spacecraft's hatch door, stood up, and for the next 2.5 hours performed a stand-up EVA, during which time he mounted a camera to the side of the spacecraft and collected a micrometeorite package. He also took ultraviolet photographs of various constellations and took standard home pictures for people back on Earth. By the time Aldrin returned to the spacecraft and closed the hatch, he had completed the longest stand-up EVA of the Gemini program. On day 2, Aldrin would perform the most ambitious spacewalk of the mission. Unlike the first EVA, this time, after he opened the hatch, Aldrin exited the spacecraft. As he navigated around the Gemini and Agena vehicles, Aldrin availed himself of devices designed to aid in maintaining control over his movement. As Aldrin described it, footholds dubbed golden slippers helped keep his feet in place, making hand and body movements very Earth-like. Restraining straps worn around his waist, similar to those worn by window washers, worked perfectly. Handrails had been installed, enabling Aldrin to easily work his way between the spacecraft and Agena. Aldrin eventually made his way to the adapter behind the Gemini spacecraft, where he performed ratcheting, bolting, and screwing chores. While working at the adapter, the golden slippers held Aldrin in place, allowing for rest periods to avoid the exhaustion faced by previous Gemini spacewalkers. Throughout the EVA, Aldrin's heart rate remained low, and he never tired from the activity. 2 hours and 6 minutes after it began, the second EVA of the Gemini 12 mission had concluded. By the time Aldrin re-entered the spacecraft, he had performed the most successful EVA of the American space program up to that time. The success of Aldrin's spacewalk established conclusively that if properly equipped, an astronaut can work freely in the space environment. Following undocking from the Agena target vehicle, the third and final EVA of the Gemini 12 mission commenced at 66 hours and 6 minutes ground elapsed time. Once again, Aldrin stood up in the open hatch of the spacecraft, snapping photographs. He also took the opportunity to discard any unwanted hardware from the spacecraft. By the time Aldrin wrapped up the 51-minute EVA, he had set a record for duration of extravehicular activity at 5 hours and 26 minutes.